Why does relationship satisfaction drop for both partners after having children?
It can be a response to carrying too much for too long, a response to the inequity, to discovering that your most intimate partner relationship isn't as equal as you thought.
Why, even when dads are doing more than our fathers ever did, does it still feel like it's not enough?
The reality is that women in hetero relationships are still doing twice the amount of childcare, domestic labour as men, even when they're working. So there is a reality there that means this anger makes sense.
What do we believe the job of a mum is? What do we believe the job of a dad is?
When I'm understanding maternal rage, obviously I'm interested in what is happening for the woman and inside the woman in front of me. But I think if we locate that anger only within individuals, it takes the focus away from these really oppressive conditions, actually, that we're parenting with him.
Can ideas around masculinity actually help me as a father, or are they things I should be fighting against? Where did these ideas come from? And what happens to our relationships when we try to live up to ideals that were never designed for the lives we're living now?
You both then might get stuck in old defensive patterns of relating that help you survive, but now are blocking connection between the two of you. Because of all those culturally prescribed ways that women are taught to feel and express anger, we can end up putting our energy into anger styles that don't serve us in the long run.
In this podcast, I talk to authors, academics, sociologists, gender experts, and parenting experts to understand what's really happening to couples after they have children and find out if there is a way to be a happier parent. Today's guest is Dr. Caroline Boyd, a clinical psychologist and author with over a decade of experience supporting parents with mental health and their transition to parenthood. Caroline has recently turned her attention to maternal rage, and her course, Maternal Rage, Changing the Dance of Anger with Loved Ones, was honestly just brilliant for me to go through as a dad. In this episode, we talk about maternal rage, why it needs to be treated as a distinct issue from general anger. We explore the circle of emotions, the different emotional systems at play, and what dads specifically need to understand about how parenting affects mothers' emotional states. We get into anger, grief, anxiety, guilt, and how all these interact with each other. We look at our responses to anger, when it's useful, when it isn't, and how we can access it in a healthier way. This is one of those conversations that I really wish I'd been able to listen to when my kids were young, back when my wife and I were particularly stuck in our cycle of resentment. This conversation would have done so much for us, and I hope it does the same for you. If you are stuck, if you're stuck feeling resentful towards your partner, I want you to go over to School, that's SKOOL, and find Be a Happier Parent on School. I'll put it in the show notes. It is my coaching community for couples, but you can join it on your own. There's a free trial for a week, but also if I don't get you out of resentment in your marriage in 5 weeks, I will give you your money back, no questions asked. That's how confident I am. On to the episode. You've been working with mums for ages. Why focus on maternal rage? Why do we need to treat maternal rage differently to parental rage or differently to just rage?
If we zoom out, as human beings, we all experience anger. Of course we do. And it's a universal emotion, and we all have a right to feel it. And anger, it gets a bad rap. But, it's neither good nor bad. It's an intelligent signal alerting us to harm, insult, violation, and injustice. And at the same time, I think maternal rage is a particular context, and maternal anger and rage doesn't exist in a vacuum. So I guess for me, it's really important to highlight this very particular cultural context that modern mothers are mothering in today. Mothers are charged with responsibility and expected to carry I would say, the bulk of the childcare, domestic labour and emotional labour. And we hold mothers to impossible standards around what it means to be a good mum, to be endlessly patient, selfless and emotionally available at all times. So when I'm understanding maternal rage, obviously I'm interested in what is happening for the woman and inside the woman in front of me. But I think if we locate that anger only within individuals, then it invisibilizes mothers' work that they're doing, and it takes the focus away from these really oppressive conditions, actually, that we're parenting with them. So I think it's really important, actually, to understand and bring attention to those conditions. And when we can do that and understand the context that this anger for mothers arises in, that anger makes a lot of sense. And it's a very valid and understandable response to inequity, to impossible standards, to stories that we've absorbed about what it means to be a good mother. So, yeah, I think that context deserves attention, and that focus really matters.
Yeah, so there's something there, isn't there, where it's actually, like, sort of similar to a lot of the work I do. It's like, actually, once we can take away this idea that this is individually your problem as a person, once we can say there's a reason this is happening for all mums, let's look at why. We can understand it better, we can deal with it better.
And we can understand the causes, the real causes of that anger, without only focusing on the woman's reaction, which is historically what has and still happens, which, is where the mother will get labelled hysterical or
Emotional.
mad, overly emotional,
Right.
overly sensitive. That's applied to all women historically.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's really important that we locate this within the context in which we're mothering in.
So let's get into that context, but I just want to start with, your book starts with the supermum and the problems with this ideal of the supermum. And I know that's part of the context, so just give us that one first. Who is she? Where did she come from? Why do we believe that she's a thing?
Yeah. Well, where does she come from? I mean, she's been around for a long, long time. And when I talk about the myth of Supermum, I'm talking about that fantasy mum who is endlessly patient, knows instinctively, quote unquote, how to mother, enjoys every minute, and is somehow able to do it all without needing much herself. And these ideas that are attached to this fantasy mum, by the way, we absorb from a very early age. So they're in the stories that we read as children, and the stories that we hear. They're attached to the Madonna and Child, those idealized images we see on church windows. And the problem is that it's an impossible standard. So it sets mothers up to fail from the get-go. And on this, I find a distinction that Adrian Rich made really, really helpful, which is understanding the distinction between motherhood as a set of cultural expectations, beliefs, rules and regulations that are tied to patriarchy. So this is understanding motherhood as institution, and mothering as the lived experience and a potential source of power. Because I think when we can, name that context of motherhood as institution, and that goes back to what I was just talking about, the conditions, the impossible expectations, the fact that mums are often just charged with so much responsibility to be emotionally available 24/7, etc., then I think it gives women permission to resist that, to challenge those patriarchal ideals attached to motherhood. And then if we think about mothering as the lived reality, then it becomes a lot more forgiving, and it allows women to be human. Within mothering, this is the day-to-day of the caring, the snuggling with my kids and laughing with them, just sharing a joke, and all the beautiful things about being a mum. And I think it also allows us agency, because within mothering, we can get in touch with our values about, what's important to us as mothers, what's important to the child in front of us. So it's much more humane, a lot more forgiving, and it allows for repair. Our humanity. We make mistakes, we mess up, and we repair.
When is Adrienne Rich writing this?
I think it's 76, so her books of
Right.
women born.
Yeah, okay. And I remember that Matrescence quotes that book quite heavily, doesn't it? Lucy Jones's book.
I'm sure, yeah, she will do. It was
just
very
basically being like,
influential.
not much has changed, really, I think is what she's pointing out from her writing this book in 1976. These ideals actually have got worse. And I think it's worth, saying that as a man reading books about motherhood, this was a huge thing that jumped out for me, that there's no dad equivalent of these ideals. Obviously, there's damaging ideals around masculinity and what men should be, but they're not connected to fatherhood. There's no paternal instinct or natural father. And you have this is my favorite bit of your course, right? You have this bit where you show us, it was so good to see this as a man, actually. You show us like a whole series of images of like the perfect mother and the kind of images we're bombarded with, but mainly women are bombarded with, right? Men aren't bombarded with these. So it's really good to have that reference point. And they are all these women wearing like just ludicrous kind of like white cashmere and stuff you'd be off your head to wear around small children. And their homes are immaculate and they're all laughing. And you're like, your manner throughout the course, you're so gentle, you're so empathic and everything. And you just come on and you say, now, I want you to think when you look at these pictures, would you actually like to be friends with any of these mums? And I just couldn't. I had to listen to it 3 times. It made me laugh so much.
Yeah, it's like that fierce compassion that we have when we get in touch with our own anger. And, I read a lot about motherhood because I did my research on intrusive thoughts about the baby when I was having my own children. So I read a lot of critical psychology stuff when I was heavily pregnant with my second baby, my son, who is now 10. But I found a lot of the writing, the literature about the nature of patriarchal motherhood incredibly anger-inducing. And then I had my second baby and felt like I'd flown straight into the wall of the patriarchy because none of us are immune to it. So yeah, I think it can feel really oppressive to women and at worst dehumanizing. So that kind of the piece about mothering, I feel, is really important at a time when, social media is just promoting and bombarding, as you say, mothers with all this curated content and just fueling guilt and shame. And that's just intensifies these big emotions that then leak out sideways or erupt from mums.
So I think let's try and run through all the places that this rage can stem from. What we've done so far is you've got this kind of impossible ideal. You've got this kind of restrictive nature of motherhood as an institution. I think there's something in there which is really important for me to understand, is that this idea that mums are completely selfless, that good mums don't do anything for themselves, that actually they should lose their identity to become mother, which is just so different again to being a dad. What else should we put on that list that mums should know, but actually the dad should understand as well?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. I think your listeners will too. And by the way, I think that I should say, I think that patriarchy harms all of us, men and women included. But I understand we might come on to that a bit more later in terms of some of those damaging beliefs that I think men absorb too, and then can play out in the couple relationship, particularly for hetero couples. But yeah, in answer to your question, so where does this anger come from? It comes from all sorts of places. I think it can be a cumulative response to sheer overwhelm amid those endless demands of modern motherhood. For me, it can be as simple as a lost shoe before the school run, and it can be a response to overstimulation. I think it can be a response to carrying too much for too long, a response to the inequity, to discovering that your most intimate partner relationship isn't as equal as you thought. And I think within that, it can be a response to feeling unseen by a partner. And that certainly comes into my work with mums a lot. and perhaps not feeling valued or appreciated for all that unpaid work that you're doing, often alongside the paid work. And yeah, so it comes from lots of different places.
Those all tie together with one word, which is injustice. Even the lost shoe. I think there's this kind of, how can I be working non-stop? I'm the only one who cares, and the shoe's still fucking lost. Like, that all comes down to this feeling of injustice, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of injustice that gets activated for mums after having a baby. I think it's also violation, violated boundaries, body boundaries, lines getting crossed within the partner relationship. And that, of course, can come from perhaps mothers not having been taught how to put in those boundaries for themselves.
Just explain what you mean by lines being crossed in the partner relationship.
Assumptions being made about what's expected of each other in the roles that you're in.
Right.
So I think, we don't, happens at the moment, we meet someone who we might be crazy about, or we slowly fall in love with. And then we have those conversations perhaps about, do we want to have a child together? But we don't kind of sit down and have those reflective conversations about, what was your experience of being parented like? And what are your beliefs and assumptions and expectations about your role as a mum or my role as a dad? And what do we want to take forward? And what do we definitely not want to replicate? So we kind of arrive in this chaos where each party is grappling with becoming a new parent and experiencing their own matrescence and putrescence, which we know comes with, that huge identity shift, changes to our brains, bodies, nervous systems, the relationships around us, including friendships and often finances and values. So it's like a perfect storm. And then meanwhile, a baby arrives in your family and all your attention and energy and resources are being diverted to the baby. And of course, often the couple relationship gets neglected, I think, to an extent, because that's going on. That's quite understandable. And then the strain begins to show, because I think the disconnection gets created and in many ways intensified between the mother and the father, where perhaps they don't know how to broach it with each other. There's fear there. I think there's a lot of fear around talking, having those difficult conversations. And often there isn't, some people don't have a language for the mental load. I know you talk about it a lot on your account, which is, it's just so helpful, because actually when both mums and dads have a language for it, it's very empowering. And then you can start to address it.
Everything. It changes everything. We just had resentment without reason. I couldn't formulate the words. What do you mean you think you're doing everything? Can you not see what I'm doing? It was every time it went the same way until we had the vocabulary.
Right.
Okay, that feels like perfect time for a quick ad break. Are you stuck having these arguments? The ones about who's doing more, who's carrying more responsibility, who's the one who's actually getting some downtime? I've been coaching couples on how to get past these arguments, drop the resentment, and get on the same team so you can face the inevitable stresses of parenthood together. And it's great, but one-to-one coaching is expensive, and the real problem, parents with young kids are some of the most time-poor people in the world. You can't exactly book a session for after your child goes to bed. It always turns into like a 10 p.m. scramble. Just doesn't work. So I've taken the coaching I do one-to-one and broken it down into easy to work through videos and conversations that you can fit into your own time. You can do the first week of coaching for free and see if it works for you. And I'm so confident that this stuff works that if I haven't got you past that place of resentment, if I haven't ended resentment in your relationship after 5 weeks, I'll give you your money back. Go check it out on School. That's SKOOL. Search Be a Happier Parent or just follow the link in the show notes. And I'm in there answering people's questions every day. So once you join the community, come and say hello. I think let's look at all acknowledge all the pressures, right, that stop that good communication and stop those conversations happening, right? We've got sort of sleep deprivation. We've got all the shoulds that mum has in her head that are driving her, which until we start reading these books, I think as dads, we don't really understand. So actually from our side, it's like, sorry, you're frustrated that your career's on the back burner and you're frustrated that you're up all night feeding on demand and you're frustrated. But these all look to us like choices that the mum has made, because we do not understand this ideal that she's being yanked around with. That's why I think it's so important for men to get this, to understand that actually these aren't choices.
Not necessarily conscious choices.
Sorry, yes, that's right. Yeah.
I think they're the beliefs and the stories that we were talking about. And, for women, it's having a baby is seen as, it's just expected. I think less so now, with more women choosing to be childless by choice. But it has been, and I think continues to be for many women, expected as this kind of entry into womanhood. So we go into it with this expectation, we're going to be this endlessly patient mother. And when we feel we don't live up to that ideal, which is impossible anyway, I think a lot of the anger is actually, directed inward at ourselves for failing to live up to that ideal. And as well as feeling perhaps quite invisible, unappreciated in doing a lot of the domestic and work and the childcare, because the reality is that women in hetero relationships are still doing twice the amount of childcare, domestic labor as men, even when they're working. So there is a reality there that means this anger makes sense.
Talk to me about, because this is going to tie some of this together. Talk to me about the 3 circles of emotion, and just talk us through those.
Okay. So this is something that I bring into my work and I bring into my book and the course. I find it really helpful. It comes from compassion-focused therapy, and the 3 circle of emotions model it's an evolutionary model, and I find it a really helpful way of understanding how our brains and nervous systems respond to stress. So the idea is very grounded in evidence, is that we're made up of 3 emotional systems. So there's our threat system, our drive system, and our soothing system. And I can explain these a bit in a moment. And it explains what sort of happens in each system, what's going on there, and why we can become stuck in those cycles of anxiety, overwhelm, perfectionism, and burnout. So should I just briefly talk through them?
Yeah.
Is that helpful?
It is, yeah.
So
let's
our
do
threat system,
yeah.
If we start there, I usually start there because as human beings, we have such a strong negative bias. It's how we're wired to keep ourselves safe. So the threat system is about survival. And this is where our fight, flight, freeze, appease reactions get activated. Emotions like anxiety, anger, self-criticism, and is highly sensitive, highly reactive. And this is the system which floods our body with adrenaline, cortisol, and then we shallow breathe, our heart races, and we become ready to act in the fight part of our fight, flight, freeze. We're ready to act right now. There's that urgency that can come with anger. And then the drive system, which is often blue, like usually I have a visual when I'm teaching this model, because we all like a visual. But the drive system is very much about gathering resources and achieving things.
So this is drive, as in my drive to do things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of about motivation associated with the hormone dopamine, and it stimulates those positive feelings linked to doing well at school, at work.
I've got a promotion, promoted. I've made more money, I bought something I like.
That's it, going shopping, consuming, having our favourite dinner put in front of us, finding a life partner and finding a nice house. So it's kind of what gets us ticking off to-do lists, striving, achieving, going forward. And Then the soothing system, which for many of the mums I work with, it barely gets a look in. So this system will be green for people who like to visualize things. And it's very much about safety and connection, and associated with hormones like oxytocin and endorphins. So this is like connection to yourself when you're kind of feeling grounded, calm, kind of got that just right feeling, or connected to others. So our soothing system switches on when we're having a really good chat with someone who gets it, or we're snuggling with our child, and then we're kind of
there's
doing
something
that
available
mutual
there.
Soothing.
Looking into those moments of looking into a child's eyes, right, that can be quite like spiritual in a way when you're really with a child like that. That's your soothing as well, right?
Absolutely. And that's a really lovely example of mutual soothing. So their soothing system will also be switched on at that point, flooding their body with oxytocin too. So this is a really important system, and this is, as I was saying, it's connected with safety. And when our soothing system is switched on, our threat system is dampened down. What I usually just pull out when I'm talking about the 3 circles, I know we're not going to go into it in loads of detail, but what can jeopardize the drive system is when it interacts with threat. So people who are driven to work hard linked to a fear of failure, or who constantly engage in doing, keeping busy as a way of avoiding difficult feelings, that can throw their emotional systems out of balance. And we know that mothers are often in doing mode. There seems to be so much stuff to get done, and all those kind of repetitive tasks of mothering, the cleaning, the feeding, the bathing, etc. So overactivating our drive system can lead to exhaustion and burnout. So what I'm teaching or explaining in my book and in my course is how can we intentionally switch on our soothing system in those small moments, so in realistic ways, when we're transitioning from a work day to pick up, or we're having a hot moment with our child and our body is on fire.
Yeah, it's really interesting that we get into problems when our drive system is kind of motivated by that threat system. And obviously kind of workaholism came to mind there. It's just like, I'm going to keep working because it avoids uncomfortable feelings. But also what I think, what's going on there, if we think the threat is this threat of judgment for mums, which is very, very, very strong for humans, right? We think it feels kind of life or death. We need people, otherwise we're in big trouble. So when everything becomes motivated by this judgment about not being perfect, you can see how that leads to overwhelm, how that leads to burnout. I think the other thing that jumps out of me when I think about the couples that I work with, we have often these dads who are like, I don't work a 9 to 5, right? I work insanely hard. I'm not around for this. And I feel like they're constantly in a competition of who's had the worst day. And then there's a kind of a lot of, I give my right arm to spend more time with the kids, but I need to. I just think one of the things that if men could understand about caregiving is that it's process-driven, not results-driven. It's about being there. It's very repetitive. As you say, it's this constant work of kind of keeping calm. It's relatively low on dopamine. Like, you very rarely feel like you've nailed something. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
There's a sort of absence of stuff to do that you're going to have to do again in a minute. But there's not many wins on a day at home with a kid, basically.
I know. Well, I think it's because we come to parenting where we've been feeling fairly competent in our professional career, and within that, there's feedback, there's appraisals, there's quantifiable ways of receiving external validation, and I'm feeling motivated with that. I mean, going back to the drive and the threat, for some people that can come from that fear of failure I was talking about, or picking up on what you said about work becoming a way of coping as a way of avoiding difficult feelings and keeping those at bay. This is what we might explore, and this might be familiar to you because I know you are doing counselling too, but this is what we might explore in therapy is, where does that striving come from, that part that is feeling like it must always be striving and forging ahead, isn't able to kind of look back and take stock. Anyway, then we come to parenting, and like you say, these days kind of stretch ahead, and it's not very quantifiable, and it's often done in the privacy of our own homes. It can feel really lonely, and we don't have the manager saying, "Good job, well done." If anything, we've got this kind of police person in our head, which is, I'm using as a metaphor for the sort of
Yeah,
Supermum fantasy,
everyone gets it.
Yeah, as in, you're doing a shit job and do
Yeah.
better. So then mothers are like, oh, I've got to work harder. And so that keeps the doing
And feedback
going,
from
and
toddlers
exhaustion.
is often not positive. It's often not well framed. Do you know what I mean?
It's not very nuanced.
This is disgusting, and I'm going to throw it in your face.
I mean, I've taken with my kids now, I appreciate they're a bit older. I think yours are too. But when they complain about something like the food I've cooked or whatever, I'll just say, thank you for your feedback. I mean, yes, I hear you. Okay.
I remember
What
once we were trying to expand our Robin's diet, because he was just very firmly just on beige food. They all go through that phase. And he'd mentioned that they made a paella at school and he'd eaten it. And my wife cooked him this paella and she was like, if he doesn't eat this, I slaved over it all day, I swear to God. I'm like, so I go to Robin, I'm like, darling, I want you to try this. And if you don't like it, you're just going to tell me. Okay, we're not going to tell mummy. She's worked really hard on it, but we're just going to tell me. And he tries it and he goes, where is she? Where is she? And he hunted her throughout the house and was like, pah! I just see mums just getting it like that from kids in a way that dads often don't. Right? Kids want them to suffer with them. It's a safety thing as well. I think they feel safer with mum or whatever, but it's a tough deal when I see that happening.
Yeah, no, I know. And I think, obviously we're laughing, but at the same time, it's seriously unfunny at the same time. And I think just going back to, your question about where the anger comes from, I think it's also understanding that it can come from experiences much earlier from childhood. So becoming a mum can reopen old attachment wounds. And it can also reactivate experiences of oppression, of feeling othered, for example, in terms of race, class, or sexuality. And then our experience of matrescence is very heavily shaped by other contexts like neurodivergence or hormonal changes, say linked to perimenopause. So it's very multi-layered. And I think with going back to the attachment wounds, it's just understanding that anger can often be about something that feels too raw to face directly and can be linked to experiences of growing up, of not feeling seen or safe or understood by a parent or a caregiver in a good enough way. And often, I guess what I tend to see, or a bit of a theme, is that women who haven't experienced kind of good enough parenting themselves, haven't had that good enough experience of containment and understanding, then where there's that absence, where obviously there's a lot of grief that comes with that, which they may not have been able to access before having a baby. And it can feel very raw and it can feel uncontained. And the anger can be about that part of you that feels too young, too raw to actually get in touch with. So I think that's where anger can be a protector.
Are you talking about almost a sort of an envy of, hang on, I'm here being trying to be this perfect mother. Why was this never done for me? Is that?
Yeah, I think envy speaks a lot about the care that someone didn't get. It's saying something. So, and it might be envy around seeing other mums in your area, other parents who are getting regular support from grandparents. And if you're feeling very isolated and you're not getting that emotional support or the practical hands-on support from your own parent, and there's a lot of grief and loss around what you didn't get as a child, then yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. And I think anger can be the part that's protecting that grief and loss underneath. It can also be about protesting inequity and impossible standards. I think it can also be a protector.
I mean, you've obviously, this is enormously complicated, so I'm going to ask a really convoluted question.
Go for
it. You were saying before that a lot of the anger is actually directed inwards, and I think we kind of know this about couples, that there's something that happens where you're like, everything's not right. I don't know what the problem is. Oh yeah, I do. It's you. Like, because you're right there. You're the kind of easiest person, and we've been sold this idea of romance where you're supposed to solve all my issues, which is totally unreasonable. But I'm just wondering about how these things present. When I started reading books about motherhood, it was all this stuff about guilt and shame, and I was like, okay, wow, that sounds awful. Eloise doesn't seem very guilty. She just seems really pissed off. But then when I, talking to people about that I was going to be talking to you about maternal rage, they were saying, this is men saying, yeah, well, my partner doesn't seem angry. She's just perpetually anxious. But what you're saying is that there's this link here between anger and grief and anxiety and guilt. Where do these all live with each other?
Yeah, it's a great question. And yeah, where should I start with that? I think they are so very often linked. And so what I might do is I join a therapy called Internal Family Systems, IFS, and it's a trauma-informed therapy, which understands that we all have different parts, and some carry real pain and others work hard to protect that younger part from feeling the pain, or from us in the present feeling that pain. And some of those protectors can be pretty young too. They developed early on. So actually these parts, we can understand them as intelligent survival responses. They developed early on in response to difficult or traumatic experiences. And I include attachment trauma in that. I'm talking about that little T trauma, that repeated misattunement with a parent or a caregiver. And so coming back to your question about the different emotions and how they're all linked, I think they all come from an underlying struggle that could be about early experiences, being difficult. It could be from, I guess, trauma like birth trauma, or it's just so multi-layered. It could be from having misdiagnosed or missed neurodivergence and feeling very misunderstood in that experience. But I think anxiety is saying something bad is going to happen, and guilt is saying I've done something wrong, and anger is saying something feels unfair, overwhelming, or not okay. In mothers, I think, as you're saying, they often sort of travel together, and a mother might feel really anxious because she's trying to get everything right and to live up to that fantasy mum. I say right in quotation marks. And in all that striving, she becomes exhausted, and then anger erupts as, a way of protecting, saying, I've had enough. What about me? What about my needs? And then she can then get stuck in the anger, guilt, shame cycle, because then guilt or shame turns up.
Because she's not allowed to get angry to be a good mum. Right.
Yeah. I mean, good mums, they're certainly not allowed to rage or despair or bribe their kids with chocolate.
Or screens.
Yeah. So yeah, it's complex. But I think these emotions can be saying different things, these different parts of ourselves. And if we can bring some curiosity to those with someone else, or with like a loved one, a friend, to try and just start making sense. That's always kind of where I'm wanting to come from, is your anger isn't a flaw, it's information. It's telling you something, and it's telling you something matters, whether it's an unmet need or something needs to change. And when we can start to bring curiosity to it and take it seriously, that's where beautiful things can happen.
I kind of struggle with that framing, and this might be a very masculine thing, although Sam Parker, who's been on the podcast before, has a very different relationship with anger to me. I think because anger's the only one I've been told is really okay to demonstrate. and to feel it has a very negative effect on me, and it's taken me a long time to basically not listen to it, and other than to be like, you're trying to protect me from feeling something it is okay to feel, which is going to be, it's disappointment, it's feeling unloved, it's feeling rejected, it's and I think you say at one point that anger can be seductive because it's energizing, right? It actually can come with this dopamine in a way that sadness doesn't. And I've had to learn to reject mine in order to just sit in the sadness and be sad for a bit. And it turns out that doesn't kill me.
Yeah.
But
I love that.
that's been huge work. Whereas I think, some of what you're saying is actually anger's a really good indicator that something needs to be changed. And that I've found that's not always the case.
Well, or a need is not being met. So it's not, I'm not trying to be prescriptive about what anger might or might not be saying, but I guess, through the work that I've done and the courses that I've run and my own experience of anger, we all have our own relationship with anger. I see it as it's usually protesting something or it's protecting something, and that it might be protecting something more vulnerable underneath. And I wonder if that's the case for you, where actually there's vulnerability under that anger. There's sadness there, or there's a sense of rejection, or, feeling unloved. And these are very human needs. And like you say, for a man, you learned, I'm talking more when I talk about men and women, more about in heterosexual relationships. I think that's kind of an important thing to bring. But when we're thinking about girls and boys, we each learn different emotional rule books. So for us as little girls, we're often taught to be good, to not make a fuss, to bite our tongues, to be deferential. And we might see our mother never rest. I know that's the case for me. And we kind of grow up believing that we should be selfless and definitely not angry. Whereas for boys, there are different rules there around, perhaps, you can correct me if you think I've got this wrong, but kind of tapping into what you were just saying about learning that you're not allowed to feel sadness or fear, and that anger is available to you, but vulnerability isn't, and that you're not allowed to struggle. And you might see your own dad silently kind of struggling on, providing for the family. Obviously, these are more traditional gender norms, but a lot of us have grown up with them.
They're on the tip of our tongues. I swear to God that even though now I catch myself, I used to say to my dad, "You can't cry. You're not a girl. Just stop." Like that used to just come out, right? And it's like, whoa. And they're so strong. They're so strong, and they might not be that explicit in our language, but we all carry them, and we, and they're not often conscious, but they are really there for sure.
That's right. I think we have embodied them. We do carry them. And then if you think about, we become parents and the woman believes, reinforced by the Supermum myth, I must be endlessly patient and good. And then meanwhile, the man's belief might be more like, I must provide silently without struggle. And that's reinforced by that stoic provider ideal. And it means that you both then might get stuck in old defensive patterns of relating that help you survive, but now are blocking connection between the two of you. So I think in hetero relationships, people have predictable pattern ways of managing anger and conflicts. And because of all those culturally prescribed ways that women are taught to feel and express anger, we need to be self-sacrificing, always calm, and so on. We can end up putting our energy into anger styles that don't serve us in the long run. Harriet Lerner's done some really interesting work on this, and I've certainly included that in my course, where I've got a module about, more about the partner relationship or anger showing up in a significant relationship, whether that's your mom or a parent-in-law, for example. And so, yeah, those anger styles that we can get stuck in when we're in that dance with our partner, she talks about we're either move into kind of nice lady syndrome, where we kind of silently withdraw and we become submissive. Or the other one is that we get locked into ineffective and fighting and blaming. And then we're kind of venting and we're labeled a bitch or a nag. And then we emotionally distance. And then meanwhile, the man in the relationship who's perhaps learned to disconnect, to withdraw, he's busy withdrawing. And so the cycle of disconnection continues.
And I think that, it's really interesting working with, I mean, I work with couples. I don't see dads on their own, but you do get the men being the stonewallers. And that wasn't the case. That wasn't the case in my relationship. That was my wife. And she used to say, she was used to, be like, well, I do it to protect us because I don't want this fight to go any further. And it's the same for a lot of men. I see that they withdraw because they're in fight mode. Fight mode for us really doesn't feel any different to it does getting in a street brawl. Like, my body does exactly the same thing as it used to when I used to get in fights when I'm in a heated argument. Like all the everything. I'm there, which is terrifying when you're talking to someone you love. So there is that kind of, and it's kind of it's the only one I know, and I know it's not allowed in this environment, right? We're not going to shout at you or bang the table and stuff. That's not allowed anymore. Very good. So it's just we're completely stuck. And I think sometimes that withdrawal that's all that's left to people.
Yeah. No, it's really powerful hearing you talk about it like that. And thank you for sharing, because I think it's really helpful to, understand that you're obviously married, I'm married. None of us are immune to these beliefs and stories that we internalize. And I should also say that going back to our attachment wounds, that also shapes our relationship with anger. So what I've found are big themes are that some of the women that I work with may have had an explosive parent or caregiver and learned that anger is very scary, very confusing, and they've either perhaps learned that behavior or they've learned to squash it down. It's just too terrifying. But at the same time, I've also seen women where they have grown up in homes where anger just wasn't acceptable. So there was no expressed conflict. There wasn't any space for anger. And actually, in those cases, women then learn that anger is scary and can be dangerous. So perhaps again, squash it down. I think it's understanding that in those situations, anger can come with a lot of fear, and we each bring our own attachment experiences into the couple relationship, into our experience of being a parent. And I think the goal here, coming back to the couple relationship, is it's not about who is right and who is wrong. When we get locked in that blaming, I heard something the other day that was said that blame is hurt just being discharged. And I thought that's such a great way of describing it.
Yeah.
And, there's just a lot of hurt underneath. And actually, if both parties, both parents need to be able to self-regulate in the dance and look after their own nervous system and perhaps get to know their own patterns so they can do that U-turn and attend to the anger that's coming up and what might be beneath. And there is a whole process around that, as you know, but just learning to bring a bit of curiosity and compassion to it. And I think for many mothers, the first step is validating it, taking your anger seriously.
I'm interested to hear you say that, a lot of mums or people, I don't know, may have been in a house where anger wasn't allowed, and then that's given them an unhealthy relationship with it as an emotion. Do you worry that we're perpetuating that with our obsession with gentle parenting? Because that is very much underneath. Maybe it's a misreading of it, but it feels that we're banning it as an emotion from our households.
Yeah, that's such an interesting conversation. And, maybe that could be part 2 of our conversation.
just as you got to go on the school run, I'll ask my best question.
Well, yeah, no, I got both kids home today. That's the other context. It's very hot. No, I think with gentle parenting and other trends like that, where it's become more extreme, I think there's a lot of great ideas in trends like gentle parenting, as in, we've moved from more behaviorist, perhaps more disciplinarian parenting from perhaps what we grew up with. I'm in my late 40s, and I feel like we've swung away from that, where we also have a lot more understanding of child development and understanding that, of course, we want to respect our child as a human being and validate their emotions and try to be alongside them in what they're feeling, which, by the way, for a lot of us are skills we learn on the job, going back to our own experiences.
In real
we
time.
haven't been taught those. Yeah, and that is no mean feat. That's a big old task. But I think the issue is where we've now swung too far the other way to more extreme versions of gentle parenting, conscious parenting, whatever you want to call it, where there's, the emphasis is on the child and the validation, but the boundaries are missing. And actually boundaries, setting limits and that's about how we do that in a kind and steady way.
But you could still do all of that and never ever admit to being angry or act angry. But that doesn't have to just be about boundaries, does it? That's about allowing an emotion into the home when something makes you angry. I'm just wondering where that can live, because all gentle parenting would say, no, we set boundaries and then there's these scripts. But what about, oi, that's really upset me. Do you see what I mean?
Well, yeah, that's drawing your own boundary, or it might be drawing a body boundary.
It's doing it in an angry way.
Well, you might say, this came up in one of my workshops, but I remember a mum saying it's important for her to say, mummy needs some space to her preschooler child because she's feeling really touched out.
Right.
And so I guess I don't mean boundaries and therefore you've got to say it in a certain way and adhere to scripts. I don't mean that, because I think that's not very helpful and no one's going to remember the script when they flip their lid anyway and they've moved out their window of tolerance. But I think it's about being real with your child, being human, which I guess takes us back to mothering as a practice. And actually, we're human beings and we do mess up sometimes. We make mistakes as parents. And when we can learn the repair, I think there's a lot of power in that, because if, for example, you get angry and maybe you lose your cool and you shout, and you then do the repair where you might be apologizing for your behavior and naming your behavior and giving your child, obviously depending on their age, but a bit of space to hear from them, how it felt for them, and then reminding them how loved they are and, coming back together with a hug, and then doing something soothing for both of you, because you're both needing some mutual soothing then it's teaching the child that, yeah, mummy gets angry sometimes, but it's not an emotion, it's not a dangerous emotion, it's not an emotion to be scared of. And actually, if we can give ourselves grace and understand that, yeah, sometimes we lose our cool and we don't act in the way that we kind of hoped we would, but then we repair, and then at the same time, we're kind of learning and building those self-regulation skills that we're then modeling to our kids. But if I say it quickly, it sounds really easy, but obviously it is a process. But I think the first step is acknowledging, as a mother, I have feelings too, and I need to learn to validate myself in those feelings so that I can authentically be with my child.
I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did. Dr. Caroline Boyd's course is called Maternal Rage, Changing the Dance of Anger with Loved Ones. It's really good. Obviously, it's aimed at mums, but I really recommend involving your partner too. She's given Be a Happier Parent listeners a code, Summer Support, for a massive £100 off. Details in the show notes, so you don't have to listen to that again. Caroline's book is called The Mindful New Mum. and come chat to me in my coaching community. Be a Happier Parent on School. That's SKOOL. There's a week-long free trial, and I'm on there answering questions every day. So come and say hi. I'll see you all soon.